I have a pretty basic data set here where I have a column with my persons, my coworkers, and then I have a row that gives me the month, and I have a row that gives me the day of month. And then the coworkers will register time, so whether they work from home or whether they was at school that day or whatever. Anytime they do something other than showing up physically at work, they will set a mark here. But my problem is that January and 1 isn't a date here. So ideally I'd have a row up here that says the full date. So that would be the 1st of January 2023. And then this gets extended to all of my days, but that's not what I get from my raw source, and I don't want to change my raw information because in my work case this data set is from an online Excel sheet and I don't want to go and change that, especially because I want this workflow to work also for other departments. So if I have to go and change 15 sheets, that's going to be a problem. So I can't solve that. I've just loaded into Power Query in Power BI. What I actually want to do is that right now I have a pivoted table. So a pivot table where I have salesperson in my column and then each day over here in the columns. But I don't want that. I want to have my salespersons in one column. I want to have my date information in one column, and I want to have my value in one column. So I need to fix the fact that January doesn't help me and 1 doesn't help me. I need to convert that into a date, which I can then have in my row. So I'll say Denji 1st of January, he did whatever. Denji 2nd of January, he did whatever. And since I've already said I want to unpivot, I can show just what happens if I try to do that too early, because right now it will not work. So if this was a proper data set where my column headers were dates, then I could simply do unpivot other columns, and this is exactly what I want. I have person, I have day, and I have the value. But things are not that easy. And I'll be showing two methods where you should not do method 2, because as I'll get to it, it's going to be very slow and it uses List.Accumulate, which most people won't know. So it's very confusing to hand that over to someone else. Not do any of that and not promote headers because I need access to my January row. So I actually need to not do anything to the raw table, and then yeah, this is going to break because it doesn't understand it. So we'll just do that again. Yeah, and this obviously isn't what I want because it doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. So I have all the information I need in order to get my dates, and actually not just my dates, because I also need column 1 to be called person. But I have the information I need in the first row and in the second row, and I need to concatenate these two values also with my year. So if I just reference that, and what I first want to do is to extract the values from the first row, which is simply to refer to my source step and say I want to extract the 0th index, which is the first row, and that is fine. Then I want to convert this into a table because I can't do what I want to do with just the record. And all of these columns are going to be converted into then proper columns in a table format. So I will say I want that to be record to table, and that would be my previous step. And the problem here is that this is called navigation, which doesn't exactly help me, because if I just typed in navigation, that's not actually the name of the step. And this is just a little funny quirk with Power Query where it just calls the step navigation, but it doesn't matter how hard I press F2, I can't change this name, and I can't even rename it. But what I can do is go into Advanced Editor and see what it's actually called, and it's called Custom 1. And I can change that to be row 0, and then it might be mad, but we'll find that out real quick. Yeah, see, it isn't updated here. It's still called navigation, even though it's not called navigation. But here it understands it's row 0. So I could add a comment here and say this step is actually called row 0. And here I'm using the trick that this slash asterisk slash is normally for multi-line comments, but the problem is here that if I add a comment outside of my parentheses, then I notice that it often gets deleted as it did just here. And if I just added a comment like this and said A, well then the parentheses is also part of the comment, which means it will break because it needs that parentheses. And you could go to a new line which would break the comments, but this is ugly. So I can use the /*/ to actually have a comment inside. So that's just a little hack. But that is my row 0. And I want that to be called 0 table. And now I need to repeat the exact same thing. Yeah, in this method I'll do that. I'll remove the person. And then I can add another step where I am actually going to copy paste this. And now, because it's not right after the source step, it's called custom 1. And again, I'll do row to table, and that was called row 1. And actually I should call that, to follow the same syntax of row 0 and row 1, I should call that row 1. And at this point, because they have the same column 1 here, or rather the name column is the same, I can do a merge. And what I want is, since I want to not have the person row, I can do a right outer join, which you normally don't do. But that's just because I chose to extract row 0 first and then row 1, because I think that makes more sense. So simple merge, name. And now I can't actually get the name that I want, which would be filtered rows, but I'll fix that afterwards. So right now I'm going to get very ugly code that breaks, but that's fine. I just need this step because it's easier to work with. So I don't want it to be called unpivot too early, because that's that table. I want the filtered rows table, which is a step inside my query. So this is where I'm using these intermediary steps. And I can't find column 1 because that was called a name. So this is the key. And I also don't want it to be called unpivot too early, the new column. And then it was a right outer join, which means I don't have column 1, which is fine. And I don't need the original column name. I don't need the name, I need the values. Now I have January and I have the day. And at this point I want to do, and now merge queries is going to fail, but I just want to get the current year, because that might change. So I want to get, and I want to turn that into a text, but let's work backwards. So first I need to get local now, which is the current time. And then I need to say, I want only the date portion, the date.from, but I don't want the whole date. I want the year portion. So I'll do date.year, but this is a number, as I can see up here, number tools, and I want it to be text, so I can do a string concatenation. And I could do that in my function, but I'd rather do it one time than for each row. So now it's a text tool. And then merge queries fails because it's trying to use custom 1, but it should actually use row 1 table. But that is fine, and that's just something you get used to when you add these intermediary steps. So now I'm back to the beginning, and I can now add a calculated column where again value will be a number. So I will need to turn that into a text. So I can say, and I want it to be a date, the whole column. So I can say date from, well, I want the text from my value column, and I want to do string concatenation, and it should, I'm just going to add a dash just to be sure, because I don't know how it will act if I say 1 January, if it understands that, as I've shown before with the dates. Month, which is already text, so I don't have to do anything with that. And these have terrible column names, but it really doesn't matter at this point. And then I wanted the year, which is current year, parentheses, and then yeah. So this is a date, but it's not formatted as a date yet. So I need to go up in the added column, here column type, and say I want type date, which means I now have that, and I don't want that to be called that. I want it to be called date copy. And then I can delete. I need the name in order to do my, what I have to do in a minute, where I have to add this to the raw table, so I can promote these as headers, because this is now my header. And they remove other columns. And then I have, and actually I want the name to be first, just because I think that will make more sense, since this is effectively my key, the name. I'm using name to find the column here. And then this is the value I want. Just look through my notes here, and later on I'll show that actually removing this column 1 row where I had the salespeople the name, if I can find that. Yeah, here, where I wanted to remove person. I actually want to add that later on, but right now I'm going to keep it to show how you can solve that. And I can also see that I made a mistake. Well, I didn't make a mistake, Power Query did. And it said I only want the rows where the value column has the value January, but obviously I don't want that because I should have February and March and so on. So actually what I want to do is to remove those rows where the value column has the value persons. I think it was a salesperson. No, just person, yeah. But I'm going to keep it in that I've removed column 1 and then I'll show how I deal with that. But I should have kept it in. At this point I can go and show the two methods to use because now I've already made my preparation. These are the original column names. These are what I want the column names to be called. So I will be referring to this so I can split these up into two queries. So I want that, and then at this point I need to transpose so that I can convert these into column headers, and this should be my values. So if I just say transform and transpose, so I'm swapping around rows and columns, and now I have the same problem as before where my column headers don't make sense, but I can promote my first row into my column headers by just pressing that button, which does stuff to tables. So first row is headers. And here I definitely want to remove that change type step because in the future I will add more rows. Like I'm just lazy here and I only added 20. But right now I have promoted my headers, and here I want to do a merge. No, not a merge. I want to do an append, which I rarely use. But in this case, it does exactly what I want to do because I want this to be my row 1. I actually want to take my original raw table and insert this table as its first row. And that's why I needed the columns to be the same as in raw. But again, I removed column 1, which was a mistake, and I'll solve that. So I want to say I want to merge append. And in a moment I'll also show, once I'm done with this, I'll show you can also use the InsertRows function, but this is a button, so it's a lot easier to use. And I want to append raw, and then what you'll see is I still have that January and 1 row, but I can remove those afterwards. But my problem now is that if I just update my column headers, first row is headers, and then delete that change type step. This is all fine except for the one column where I wanted that to be persons. And I think the way I solved that, yeah, you can just add a new column where I just say I only want the value person, which would solve it. You could also say, because I know for a fact that this is always going to be the last column, because when you do the merge, it will take the original, the first table, and say, well, I'm looking at all of these columns, and then I'm adding the other table, and if they have the same column name, not position, then rows go in the corresponding column, if that makes sense. So column 14, it says, okay, grab the value from raw table, column 14, I put that in that column. And because column 1 can't be found in promoted headers, it's added to the end. So I know for a fact that the column that gives me problems is the one at the end. And again, I shouldn't have deleted this here. I shouldn't have done this, but I'm going to keep it in just to show how you can solve this problem. Because if I keep in persons, then when I add my new custom column, I need to do something like say, if the value in the value column is persons, then I just want to return persons, because that should be my column header. So that would make this function a tiny bit more complicated, and I can remove one step, but I'm not going to do that. So I can solve this problem by adding a new column where I just say that it should be called person, because that's what I want the header to be called. Actually, I should do that before I do my appending, otherwise that's going to break. So this was called column 1. So I need to make sure that those match, and that's, yeah, I should add that before I do my append. And actually I also want to do it before promote headers, because well, it can't promote, then I have to promote twice, but then this would mess up. So I'll add a new custom column, and it should just have the value that I want the column to be called once I do my custom, once I do my promoted headers. And if I really wanted to, I could grab the value of this name. So I could say list, that was column names. No, it's not table. It is table column names, and I want to grab that from that, which will give me a list. And then I can say I want the first position on the list. Actually, that should be 0 because index 0. And this way I don't have to refer specifically. Yeah, now Power Query is being annoying with the navigation thing again. So I need to go back into Advanced Editor and say I don't want that. And I want that to be sheet 1, otherwise this will break. And now it's being annoying again because of the comma. Yeah, so that is fine. And now I need to remember where I was. I added a custom column, and I don't want it to be called column 1, 1. Oh yeah, I actually can't do that. I need to promote headers. Actually, no, I need to delete that first row because that doesn't matter anymore. I mean, I can promote headers, it's not a problem. So that would probably be just for the sake of showing things, it's easier to just say I now promoted that, but it didn't actually do anything. And then I add my custom, but I don't want it to be called column 1, 1. And it should have been called column 1 because that's what it's called under the raw table, column 1. But I want this to be variable, so I will use the function I just printed. Table column names sheet 1 sheet. Well, that's not the name of the table. The name of the table is raw and index position 0. So that will give me column 1 in this case. And now I can do my promoted headers, but now I can't append anymore because I removed what I needed. So I actually made a lot of mistakes here, which is luckily fine because it's easy to fix. So I need to do my appending first before I promote, because that has the column 1, column 2, column 3, to which I can do my appending. Yeah, looking at my notes, I actually do want to promote headers after my transposing because I get that column 1, column 2, the randomly generate, well, the the generated column names, which I don't want because I already got these names from my source because these are the columns I want to change the name of. So I do want to transpose first to convert rows into columns and then promote headers because I used this as my link into the raw table. So when I do my append, I get what I want. And then because I had this extra column 1 from my raw table, which I don't have in my this table yet. So after I do my promotion, that's when I want to add a custom. Yeah, there. So now I've added a new column, which is just the name of the one from raw, which is because I made that quote unquote mistake. So now I have column 1, which I can then link when I do my appending. So now person becomes here. And then when I promote headers, well, this is now correct because now I have person in the first row and the dates in the first row. So promoting headers does that. And then I need to delete the first 2 rows, which is just found in the GUI. So I want to remove the top 2 rows. And now we have person, and I just, to make it easier to follow, I want to move this to the start. And this gives this terrible expression, which I definitely don't want. So I definitely want to delete that. And there are ways to handle this if you really want to, where you can just swap the position of the first and the last index, which would be just as before with the added this, where I could say, if I really wanted to, I'm just doing it to show it. I'm not actually going to do it because it's kind of pointless to do. It just makes it a little easier to read. So I want to swap the position between the last index, but then I'd need to do like list.count and grab all of the table column names because that generates a list. And now I need to mind my parentheses. So this will give me how many columns do I have. and then I actually need to say -1, I guess. And then I need to swap this last position with the first position, if that makes any sense. So that needs to be inside of these curly brackets. And then say I just want position 0. We're just going to skip that because it's not important right now. But if you really wanted to, you could do that. So you just swap these two positions. But at this point, I want to unpivot, but just as before, if I unpivot, you can see that it's still not ready because I lost a lot of dates because the unpivoting doesn't understand I want to keep the null rows, which means what I have to do is to first convert my nulls into another value, which I need to make sure isn't found inside of my normal rows. And then I can do my unpivoting. So here I just want to convert the nulls of everything to, if I just do that normally, if I select every single row except for persons and just say transform, replace nulls with, I know 999 won't be used. Well, then I again get a list of all my column names, which is static. So that's going to break when I add more dates, which means I actually need to first get my column headers. So again, that was table column names. And then when I do my replace values, I want to pass this list in as my list here. So actually, So now I just need to go back to remove top rows, and then I can use the table replace function. And I'm just going to copy paste it because it's I mean, you can just go and click the button transform replace values, but I'm just going to write it because I have that on my notes, so I'm cheating a little. And I'm acting on the remove top rows table, and I want to replace null with 999. And the function I'll use is the replace value and not text. And then my list is simply the previous step, which is custom 1, and I need to change that. So now all the nulls get replaced by 999. And now I can finally do my unpivoting. And because I'm saying unpivot other columns, it doesn't matter how many columns I have or if it's changing, because it just straight up doesn't care. And then I can change attribute to date and value to type. I guess you would want to figure out a better name for this. And finally, I can now do my replace values again because I actually do want nulls. Well, you might want to change that to something else like showed up physically, but it would depend again on the specific context. I'm going to keep null because I don't know how I want to handle it later on. So that was method 1, which is the one I would recommend you use. And instead here of using the merge, I'm just going to show how you could use another function, the InsertRows function. So instead of saying table combine, I just want to replace this with table InsertRows. And I want to say, I want the raw table, and I want the new row to be inserted on position 0. And then I need to pass in a list because I could pass in multiple rows. And then that should be that table, which was called added custom, added. And now that gets mad. That's because I am inserting rows, which means I can't insert a table because I need to insert a row. So I need to convert that into a record first, which I can just do by saying I want to go into the added custom table and get the 0 index row. So that should be inside these curly brackets, and then say 0. And then I get this person and 0, 1 and blah, 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 blah. And now everything is just peachy. And now everything works the exact same way. So I would personally use the append option because this is the GUI. So you just have to click the buttons and it shows you what's going on. And table insert rows is like, oh, you have to pass in a list of columns or a list of rows, which is always weird. I don't like to do that. because I think it's confusing for the average person who uses Power Query. And appending is a lot easier because you just press on the gear and it says, okay, what am I doing here? I'm appending. Okay, well, that makes sense.